You're listening to XFM Manchester. I'm Dave Haslam, and in the studio with me now, John Squire, the legendary John Squire, is here. Thank you very much for coming in, John.
I'm not that old, am I?
You're legendary. You're not as old as me, though. I was wondering, when was the last time that you've sat down and made a point of listening to a Stone Roses song?
I played a few last time I toured, so just prior to that.
But since then...
I was forced to, for work.
to try and remember them. So the irony is that I probably listen to more Stone Roses records than you do at the moment, and the listeners probably do. I listen to about 2 or 3 times a week.
Why is that?
And you don't. Because I love the band.
All right.
And obviously your solo albums, the second one came out a few years ago. Since then, have you been writing songs?
I have, yeah. Although I've not played guitar this year, I have to confess. I got halfway through an album whilst thinking of myself as an artist. I made the jump, the quantum leap, to actually call myself a painter for the first time, and that really got in the way of the music. I got halfway through an album and hung up my plectrums.
Right. And so what made you decide to make that quantum leap and say, I am a painter, and put away the plectrum? What was it?
I think, ironically, it was the music. Simon Moran, my manager, had the idea of putting on an art exhibition to promote the first solo album, and he really had to twist my arm to get me to do that, because I didn't feel the work was good enough and there wasn't enough of it to warrant a show. But I found that seeing it all together and going through that process, I really enjoyed it. And with the second album, which was wholly inspired by the work of Edward Hopper, I realised instead of painting, I was trying to sing and play and write songs about painting, which, I don't know, the kids weren't ready for that.
And this evening, obviously we're going to talk a lot more about your art and your work as a painter, and also your music career. And you've very kindly brought in a few tunes for us to listen to. And the first one that we're going to listen to is the Beach Boys, because I did kind of say to you if you could bring in maybe some tunes that influenced you, got you into music and so on. Why did you choose this track? Sloop John B. it is, by the Beach Boys.
Because the first album I bought was a Beach Boys compilation called 20 Golden Greats, I think. Great title. I think it was just as I was leaving junior school, and it was the first band that I became obsessed with. First record I bought, so it seemed appropriate for today.
Okay, so we'll hear it now. You're listening to XFM Manchester. I'm Dave Haslam, talking to John Squire, and this is the Beach Boys' Sloop John B. John Squire is in the studio, and that was one of John's picks, one of the records that turned him onto music as a teenager. We'll talk a little bit more about John's music and the Stone Roses and so on in a bit, but as John was telling us before we were listening to the Beach Boys, he's embarked on his art pretty much full-time at the moment. And what are you currently working on, John, in terms of art?
A huge painting for the exhibition in July down at the Smithfield Gallery,
which opens on the 4th of July.
Yeah.
How big? What big? As in a big canvas?
You need a ladder, that kind of big.
Do you?
Yeah. It's good fun.
And is that propped up against a wall somewhere as we speak?
Yeah, it's going straight back to that.
And so,
but before I forget, could I take this opportunity to apologise to Mark Pivaro, who very kindly lent me a copy of Pet Sounds when I was 13, and I dropped a cassette on it, dented the vinyl, and gave it back to him without saying anything.
And did he mention it to you?
It's not been mentioned since.
Oh, well, you've got that off your chest now. Confession time. For people who haven't seen examples of your work, how would you describe how would you describe the work that you're doing at the moment? I mean, obviously large.
Not exclusively. You know,
Right.
I'm doing some 10 by 8 stuff as well, inch. I work backwards. I paint the full canvas and then I proceed to bury it with sand, glue and more paint to hide most of the image and reveal most of the original image and reveal the areas that I choose to. It's a quite elaborate layering process. And
is a kind of colour, any particular colour that kind of predominates in your work?
No.
No. I mean, obviously you've kind of got your
prejudice.
A lot of prejudice. How do you mean?
I'm not prejudiced.
Oh, you're not prejudiced. And in terms of, it's kind of abstract work, but you do. I mean, I know that you've done a portrait of John Lydon, for example. So, is that something that you've sort of left behind? That portrait work in terms of this kind of multi-layering thing.
Yeah. I don't know. That was a bit of a blind alley, really.
Right. So that was kind of a one-off in a way.
Yeah.
But obviously, John Lydon, you were and still are a massive fan of.
Oh yeah.
And the next track you've chosen for us is "God Save the Queen" by the Sex Pistols.
Yeah. I thought I should play the song that made me want to pick up the guitar for the first time. I think I was 14. When I heard this and realised how electric guitars could be made to sound, I started pestering my dad for a guitar, got a paper round, started hanging around guitar shops on the way home from school. And, I think it was the next Christmas actually, I got the guitar.
And did your dad know you were going to make a racket that sounded like the Sex Pistols with the guitar?
I think he hoped I'd progress on to modern jazz, but it never happened.
Okay, this is "God Save the Queen" by the Sex Pistols. You're listening to XFM Manchester. I'm Dave Haslam in conversation with John Squire this evening. That's "God Save the Queen" by the Sex Pistols. You're listening to XFM Manchester. I'm Dave Haslam and with me is John Squire. He picked out that tune as one of the tunes to play for us tonight. We were talking before that about John's work as a painter, and I just wanted to. I wondered what that involves in terms of kind of what's a day in the life of a painter. Do you have like a routine, or do you wait for inspiration?
Well, the twins get me up about 6:30.
How old are the twins?
They're 2, but that's very handy because I need to work during the day now. You know, I used to do a lot of night shifts with music, but need to work with daylight, so the sooner I'm up the better. So breakfast and then into the overalls and out into the shed.
And that's where you do your work then, in the shed.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it kind of paints a picture of somebody that has kind of quite a solitary existence. In the shed, working on the painting. How does that? I mean, it's a massive change from being in a band, which it's kind of like being in a gang, isn't it?
Yeah, true.
How does it compare?
I think it suits me in middle age. But there are a lot of similarities. I mean, I spent a lot of time on my own making music and learning to play. So I feel like the work is coming from the same creative source, if you like. I'm not doing anything that different. Just a lot quieter. And
so, when you said it kind of suits you, is that kind of one of the things that lies behind the fact that, you did progress into doing solo work musically, and now you're working as a painter? I mean, is that idea that it works best for you, not being part of the band, is that something that you obviously came to recognise maybe a few years ago?
I don't think I had a real yearning for that. I mean, I did try to put two bands together after the Roses, neither of which worked, and going solo or stepping up to the mic and being the singer was like the last throw of the dice for me. I didn't feel that I could face putting another band together. Although ironically the session musicians I ended up working with on that last album were a really good set of people, and I would happily have toured the world with them, but it wasn't to be.
And in terms of that, obviously, loving, your work that you're doing now, I mean, the buzz of working in that kind of solitary existence and, working towards pieces of art, it's a very different buzz to, say, performing live or something, in front of, obviously I'm lucky enough to remember the kind of some of those, iconic gigs like Blackpool and Ali Pali and Spike Island and, and before that and after that. Do you miss that buzz of performing in front of those kind of crowds?
Well, I'm sure I'd enjoy it, if I was on stage tonight, for example, but the primary buzz for me has always been that moment of creation, being the first person to hear a new song, hear a new riff. And now for me the buzz is being the first person to see the new piece of art, to see how it comes together.
Okay, there's another tune that you brought in for us tonight is by the Jesus and Mary Chain. And which one is this from the band?
This is from Psycho Candy. It's called My Little Underground. And
obviously they kind of emerged at a similar time to the Roses. They must have been formed around the same time, kind of 84-ish.
Yeah, I think they were pretty well established before we were known nationally. And they were a big influence. They really opened my eyes. I mean, for me, it was like a reconnection with the music I'd initially got into. I could hear the Beach Boys in those chord changes and melodies. I could hear the Shangri-Las and the Ronettes, and it made melodies, pop melodies, relevant again. And after listening to the Mary Chain, I found I could start to write proper songs.
I'm Dave Haslam. You're listening to XFM Manchester, and with me tonight, John Squire. That was a track that John has brought into play this evening for us. We were talking while the song was playing about a gig that the Mary Chain did at the Hacienda, and you were there, weren't you, John?
Yeah.
It was only, I think, probably only a couple of hundred people there in the audience.
And 300 bouncers.
300 bouncers, because they'd just done that gig where the crowd had trashed some venue in London, hadn't they, I think?
Did the crowd trash the band?
I can't remember what happened, but they were an influence on you at that time. Like you said, just before the Roses broke. Just talking...
maybe a couple of years.
Yeah.
Or 1 year? I don't know.
I think certainly that kind of creation record sound, and the Mary Chain, early Primal Scream and all that, a lot of that did feed into a lot of the bands that were around at that time.
Yeah. We had no pop sensibility in our music until I heard the Mary Chain. It really knocked me into shape.
So before the Mary Chain, you're talking about maybe songs like So Young.
Yeah, that album we did with Martin Hannett.
And so hearing the Mary Chain changed that early sound into something a bit more...
It just showed me there was a way of combining what I loved about punk rock and what I loved about the Beach Boys.
And that...
they seemed to typify that.
But they were also very... not aggressive exactly, but kind of quite intimidating, weren't they? The Mary Chain, and quite fierce in a way on stage for pop people.
Yeah, I didn't feel that threatened.
I
was standing at the back,
behind the bouncers. One of the things I wanted to talk about, which is maybe a similar thing, is the way that. The early Stone Roses, in a way, I think from a point of view, a kind of fan's point of view, which is my point of view, the band did go through that kind of change of being quite kind of dark, maybe a bit kind of doomy, to having, I mean, you called it pop sensibility, but kind of in a way having colour in the music. And I kind of think, you know, talking about your art again, I think that was one of the things that the record sleeves helped do. You know, in those the early singles for Silvertone, Elephant Stone, Made of Stone, and so on. She Bangs the Drums. Those sleeves with the colour put the roses in a different place to that kind of that kind of slightly darker, doomier, more kind of aggressive thing. Was that kind of a conscious thing, as you, in speaking, you know, as the designer of the sleeves?
I don't think so. I mean, It's So Young had quite a colourful cover. Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
I just tried to ape the art that I admired at the time. I mean, I think, looking back, it was people like Jamie Reid who designed the Pistols sleeves and the clothes that the Clash and the Pistols wore that got me into abstract expressionism, New York art in general. There was a real verve and energy about that stuff that I could see mirrored in the music I was listening to, and I wanted to try and do that for the Roses. I wanted the art, I wanted the sleeves to be as dynamic as the music. I don't know if there's a direct correlation between getting into writing pop songs and finding red and blue in the palette. You know? Yeah,
but I mean, I know that you've kind of described those sleeves yourself as Jackson Pollock copies. I mean, what kind of drew you to his work, particular?
I think the first time I became aware of the name was flicking through a Clash photo book, and Penny Smith had made a comment about Jackson Pollock in reference to a photo of Paul Simonon. And I think they used to drip paint on the clothes and on the guitars as well, early on. Sorry, what was the question?
And that's what drew your attention to Jackson Pollock.
Yeah, it was Penny Smith.
And did you originally want original Jackson Pollock artwork on those sleeves?
It would have been nice, yeah, but who'd you get in touch with? I'm pretty sure it wouldn't have happened. But.
And one of the other parts of those Stone Roses sleeves, the kind of significant element, was the lemon, which was kind of a motif. Obviously, it kind of appears on the first album. What was the significance of the lemon?
Apparently, it was used by student protesters in Paris, '68, as an antidote to tear gas. We had a song on the album, Bye Bye Badman, that referenced that. And I thought, you know, let's slice a lemon and use that graphic device. And then nail it to a painting.
And is it weird when you kind of have, I mean, you have that kind of ideas and those ideas lie behind it, but the average Stone Roses fan buying the album isn't going to get those references. But does that not?
Well, you don't need to beat people over the head with it, do you?
But that was
with your lemon.
And these rioters in Paris, what did they do with the lemon then that made the tear gas go? What, put it in their eyes or sniff it or?
I think they put it in Coke.
Right.
In a glass of Coke.
In a glass of Coca-Cola, we had.
With ice.
Okay, I'm going to play, you said earlier that you hadn't heard a Stone Roses record for a while. So I'm going to play Waterfall now, which is obviously off the first album, which was...
second album.
Sorry. The second, yeah. The big album. It's off the big album, Waterfall. It was described as the greatest British album of all time in the NME. How do you feel when you hear stuff like that, John?
I hear a lot of things.
No, but stuff like that is amazing, isn't it? Recently.
Was it?
Yeah.
I feel like a drink.
Well, it must be great, to have that. I mean, maybe I'm a different kind of person, but if I'd made, the greatest British album of all time, that would.
What would you do next?
I'd keep my thought. Yeah, maybe, but I would certainly keep that thought with me at all times.
Well, for me, it's all about the moment of creation, and dwelling on facts like that doesn't really help. I mean, it's flattering. I don't agree with it, but
what would you have voted for?
The greatest
British album of all time. Do you want a moment or two to think about that?
I think it would be Revolver or Beggar's Banquet.
Obviously, that album is now considered, among the greatest British albums of all time. But at the time, the Roses there was a struggle, wasn't there, really, to kind of get the band noticed. I mean, in Manchester, the band had a following quite quickly, but there was a point when
songs like that one were on demo tapes on London Record Company desks a couple of years before we got anywhere. So that puzzles me.
Yeah, people weren't listening in a way, were they? Was there a point? I mean, at that time, was there a point where you kind of doubted that you would make that bigger break?
Not really. I remember waking up on the sofa. I'd fallen asleep watching the telly one night in Chorlton. I woke up and thought, we're not going to make it.
You had a moment of doubt?
Yeah, only once.
And what do you think pulled the band through? Because it was a struggle. I mean, people always talk about kind of.
Oh, that wasn't a crisis. I was over it 5 minutes later.
But generally, the dealing, the one or two different record labels and various disputes in those early days, and the problem of trying to get the London media to pick up on what was happening.
What kept us together? We loved doing it. We loved being together. Loved playing music in a stinking beer-sodden cellar at International 2.
And so, what changed? What brought about the demise then of the band? I mean, there was that enjoyment even in hard times, and then when the band was successful, the enjoyment seemed to go.
It wasn't that quick.
It was 6 or 7 years later. It was during the making of the second album, was it?
Yeah, well, we had I'd hate to paint the picture that we had a great time, then we made a hit record and fell apart. It didn't happen that way. But as you say, the making of the second album finished the band off in a way.
And what were the circumstances?
The pivotal moments.
No, just the general, what were the ingredients, do you think, to that?
Lack of faith in the management, changing labels. I mean, in the process of extricating ourselves from the Silvertone deal, we found out that a lot of money had gone missing, and the finger pointed at the management. So we tried to get rid of the manager as well. And then whilst making the second album, we were kind of lost at sea. We didn't have a proper business manager, any sort of management really. And Doug Goldstein got involved, Guns N' Roses manager. And the band were a little bit unsure about whether to go for that or not. I know Ian and Rennie had a row about it. Maybe it expanded from that issue, I'm not sure, but I know he came to me and Manny and said that Rennie had quit the night after this big row, and he said that he wouldn't work with him again anyway. And this was a couple of weeks before the tour was due to start. And I could see in Ian's eyes that there was no turning back from that point. And I think that was really the last nail in the coffin for the band. It was never the same after that moment. Because I realised I was facing a choice in a way that I could either do the tour without the drummer or without the singer, and there was no contest.
And when you announced you were leaving the band, though, it seemed to come as a shock to the rest of the band.
Yeah, I'm sure it did.
So, if you said
it's a pretty big step to take, isn't it?
Yeah.
A bold move.
And how did you... Was there actually, in terms of that, circumstances where you were like, right, this is it, I'm going to have to make a clean break?
I didn't see any future in it other than a kind of treadmill, trading on the past. It didn't find me with any sort of creative enthusiasm.
We were talking a while ago about the second album, and obviously it turned out to be the last Stone Roses album, and the breakup of the band. Since then, have you been surprised at kind of how bad the relationship is between you and Ian?
It's hard to say, really. No, I knew it was... I knew it would be final.
Because he would have felt you'd let him down, or why would it be final?
Oh, I'm sure he did, yeah, but because our relationship, we didn't hang out together at school, and our relationship formed after school through music, through punk rock, and everything we did, virtually everything we did together was related to music. So, to take that out of the equation by leaving the band, yeah, I knew it would be a point of no return.
But there's also, it's kind of become, in a way, a bit of a public feud. With sort of various things being said in the press and so on. Is that something, I mean, obviously it's kind of, in a way, regrettable, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, I don't hear a lot of it. I mean, certain things get passed on to me, but I'm not an avid reader of the music press, so I'm pretty well insulated from it. And I've kept my comments to a bare minimum. I don't think... I think there was one in an unguarded moment, but I don't agree with slagging off your old mates.
And I mean, you obviously, I know that you've got mutual friends. Have they intervened to try and kind of heal that personal rift that you have?
Not really. I mean, I still hang out with the only person that from those days that I see on a very regular basis. I see Manny a couple of times a year, but I'm still in regular contact with Steve Cresser, who appears on the back of the first album, surfing behind one of my amps. He did ask recently over a pizza if I thought we'd ever reform, because the Mondays have done it, and whenever he goes out, that's all he gets asked. I sidestepped the question.
You didn't answer it. Have you been offered...
Ordered the salad.
Have you been offered kind of silly money to reform?
Lots of money, yeah. But it didn't seem silly.
But is the money...
That isn't what you meant.
No.
Yeah, there's lots of money there.
But is that... The money thing is... I guess, isn't there?
I think it's too late. I'm pretty sure that the band's legacy would be tarnished by a reformation.
even though there are thousands of people out there who would be made up if
Who'd be
he
biased.
reformed. Say again?
Who'd be heavily biased. We wouldn't know until the dust has settled whether it had been a mistake or not. 'Cause I tend to think of, I was involved with 3 other people and the band. It's a separate entity. And whatever we created, whatever the sum of those parts was, it became another thing. And in a way, I feel that I'd be doing that entity a disservice to cash in on it.
So it's more of a personal thing than a cash-in thing. I mean, can you imagine? Time changes everything. A moment when what you're saying now would change. If Ian phoned you up now and said, "Let's play a gig," and say a charity gig, whatever kind of gig, and that it would mean something obviously to him and to the fans and a kind of a sense of a positive closure, if you like, would you say yes?
No.
Thank you for your honesty, John.
I would say the opposite.
One of the tracks that you brought in to play for us tonight, Jimi Hendrix, Red House. I mean, obviously, Hendrix, brilliant guitarist. And this is kind of why this particular song?
Well, I told you earlier about the moment of inspiration that came from listening to God Save the Queen, wanting to pick up the guitar. And immediately after that, immediately after buying the guitar, I can remember sitting depressed on the windowsill in my bedroom with a guitar, no amplifier, picking my way through 3 Blind Mice on 1 string. and wondering how long it would take. And a few years later, my dad, who's pretty good with electronics, he'd rigged up the transformer from my train set to my record player so that I could slow all my tunes down as much as I wanted to. Then I'd retune the guitar to the record and work things out at a much easier pace. And I spent a lot of time with this particular track, and a lot of those licks made it onto Rose's records in the future.
John, we've been talking about, obviously your music and also your art, and your new exhibition opens in London on July the 4th. And you were saying earlier you've not finished the work then for that.
Oh, there's enough there to put on a show, but I paint every day, so if I come up with something suitable in the meantime, I'll include that. There's a show following it in September as well, so anything, any spare will go into that.
And do you have any intention of maybe sort of bringing kind of the music and the art together? I mean, obviously, I know that Marshall's House, your second solo album, as we were talking about it a little bit before, was influenced by the work of the artist Edward Hopper. But I was wondering whether you'd thought maybe of, maybe bringing a book of your work out alongside a CD, or doing specially commissioned music to play in the gallery, or bringing those two together in any way?
Yeah, I am working on a sound installation, but it'll be fairly hard to dance to.
And the installation will be part of the exhibition?
Yeah, it will.
And is that going to be finished for the 4th of July?
Oh, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, we're going to have to finish, but can I just say, on behalf of XFM Manchester, we're, really pleased you've come in this evening. Thank you very much
for
that. And we're going to finish after the break with your final choice, Evie Sands. Can you tell me a little bit about Evie Sands? I have to confess, it's a new name to me.
She's still recording now, but she had a lot of bad luck in the 60s. She was signed at the age of 17 to the Blue Cat label. I'm amazed that she's not more widely known, and thought I'd take this opportunity to spin one of her tunes.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much, John, for coming in tonight.
Pleasure.